There are rules in this world. Unspoken laws that govern the spaces between what we see and what we pretend doesn't exist. Most people live their entire lives without ever testing these boundaries, and they're better for it. But teenagers think they're invincible. They think the darkness is just another game to be won, another dare to be conquered. Marcus Chen thought exactly that, until the night he learned some games have consequences that last forever. This is the story of what happens when you speak a name that should never be spoken, in a language that gives words power, in a place where the veil between worlds has grown thin as gossip. This is the story of St. Catherine's Seminary, and the thing that waits there in the shadows. October in Millbrook was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. The kind of cold that makes teenagers huddle closer together, sharing warmth and secrets in equal measure. Marcus Chen had been on the outside looking in for 3 years. 3 years of watching Sarah Martinez and her inner circle from across cafeterias and hallways, desperate for the acceptance that always seemed just out of reach. "You sure about this, man?" Jake whispered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd already seen too much. But Marcus was 17, and 17-year-olds hear only what they want to hear. Sarah pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, her dark eyes gleaming with something that might have been excitement, or hunger. The rules were simple, she explained. Enter the abandoned seminary at midnight. Stand in the chapel. Speak 3 words in Latin. Lilith, regina noctis. Lilith, queen of the night. The legend was specific, Sarah continued. Never speak that name in Latin within the walls of St. Catherine's. The urban legend had been passed down through generations of Millbrook High students, each adding new details, new warnings. But Marcus had done his research. He'd spent hours in the library, scrolling through dusty folklore websites and academic papers. Lilith wasn't real, he told himself. She was a figure from ancient mythology, a cautionary tale about feminine power and male fear. He was wrong about so many things. St. Catherine's Seminary squatted on Millbrook Hill like a wound in the landscape. For 15 years, it had stood empty, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like accusing fingers. Marcus stood before the rusted gates, his phone's flashlight cutting through the October darkness. The building had been magnificent once, he could see that in the intricate stone carvings, the soaring arches, the delicate tracery of the windows. But magnificence, Marcus would learn, can hide the most terrible secrets. The chain-link fence had been cut years ago, probably by other teenagers seeking thrills in the darkness. Marcus squeezed through the gap, his jacket catching on the twisted metal. The grounds were overgrown, wild things claiming what man had abandoned. As he approached the main entrance, Marcus noticed something that should have been his first warning. The heavy oak doors were in perfect condition. No rot, no weathering, no signs of 15 years of abandonment. They looked as if they'd been carved yesterday. The doors opened at his touch, swinging inward with barely a whisper. No creaking hinges, no resistance. They wanted him to enter. Inside, the seminary glowed with its own pale light. Marcus had expected darkness, had brought flashlights and backup batteries. But the stones themselves seemed to radiate a cold, ethereal luminescence that made his skin crawl. The portraits lining the walls were the worst part. Dozens of priests and bishops, their painted eyes following his progress through the corridors. Marcus tried to ignore them, focusing on finding the chapel, but he could feel their gaze like ice between his shoulder blades. The building was larger inside than it appeared from the outside. Corridor after corridor branched off from the main hall, leading to rooms that defied architectural logic. Some doors stood open, revealing chambers filled with books that should have rotted decades ago. Others remained closed, and Marcus found himself reluctant to test their handles. He should have turned back then, should have walked away and never looked back. But Marcus was driven by something stronger than fear. The desperate need to belong, to prove himself worthy of acceptance. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he found the chapel. The chapel was a cathedral in miniature, its vaulted ceiling soaring into shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Stained glass windows depicted saints and angels, their faces serene but somehow watchful. Marcus checked his phone. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until he would speak words that had not been spoken in that place for 15 years. He spent the time exploring, trying to calm nerves that jangled like broken glass. The chapel was impossibly well preserved, like everything else in the seminary. The pews were dust-free, the altar cloth crisp and white. Even the candles looked fresh, though they cast no light. At exactly midnight, Marcus positioned himself in the center of the chapel, between the altar and the entrance. His voice, when it came, sounded small and fragile in the vast space. Lilith, regina noctis. The silence that followed was not natural. It was the silence of held breath, of the world pausing to listen. No wind, no settling wood, no distant traffic. Even his own heartbeat seemed muffled. Lilith, regina noctis, he repeated, louder this time, his breath now visible in the suddenly frigid air. The stained glass windows began to darken, as if someone was slowly turning down the lights of the world outside. The temperature continued to plummet, and Marcus could see ice forming on the stone walls. Lilith, regina noctis, he said for the third time, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. And then she appeared. She materialized between the altar and the first pew, as if she had always been there and Marcus had simply failed to notice. Beautiful and terrible, with skin like pale marble and hair that moved with no earthly wind. Her eyes were the color of the void between stars, and when she smiled, Marcus saw teeth like perfect pearls. But it was her voice that truly marked her as something other than human. You called me by my true name. Now I am bound to answer. Marcus tried to run, but his feet had become one with the stone floor. The shadows cast by the chapel's pillars began to move independently, reaching toward him like grasping fingers. Just playing a game? Just testing the old stories? Just seeing if the legends were true? With each question, she glided closer, her feet never quite touching the ground. She moved like liquid shadow, like darkness given form and purpose. I've been waiting so long for someone to say it correctly, to pronounce each syllable with the proper reverence. Do you know how many have tried? How many have failed? Marcus found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I don't want any trouble. I'll just leave and leave. Oh, sweet child. You don't understand. You've opened a door that cannot be closed. You've spoken words that cannot be unspoken. The shadows were closing in now, flowing across the floor like a dark tide. Marcus could feel something watching him from every corner, from every carved angel and painted saint. What do you want? What I've always wanted. What I've been denied for millennia. I want to walk again in the world above. I want to feel the sun on my skin and the wind in my hair. I want to taste mortal pleasures and mortal pain. Her hand was inches from his face now, fingers ending in points of starlight. Marcus could feel the cold radiating from her skin like winter given form. And you, dear boy, are going to help me. The truth, when it came, hit Marcus like a physical blow. This place, this seminary, had been built not to worship God, but to contain something far older and more terrible. This place was built to contain me, to keep me trapped in the spaces between spaces. The priests thought they were so clever, building their prison with stone and prayer. But they made one mistake. They forgot that prisons require guards. And guards can be corrupted. Father Matthias. The last priest to die in this place, found aged beyond his years, his hair white as snow and his eyes. The reports were inconsistent about his eyes. I whispered to him in his dreams for years, showed him visions of power and pleasure. In the end, he came to me willingly, spoke my name in the ancient tongue. But he was weak, old, already dying. I drained him dry in moments. She gestured to the shadows surrounding him, and Marcus could see shapes moving within the darkness. Other figures, other victims, their eyes empty and their mouths open in silent screams. But you're young, strong, full of life. You'll last much longer. Marcus felt the first touch of those starlight fingers against his cheek, and pain unlike anything he'd ever experienced shot through his body. It was as if she was draining his very essence. Please. I have friends, family. They'll come looking for me, will they? Do you think you're the first? The only one? This place has been feeding on children like you for 15 years. Your friends know what happened to you. They sent you here to die. The words cut deeper than any physical wound. Marcus remembered Sarah's too quick acceptance of the double bet, Jake's nervous laughter, the way they'd all watched him leave. They've been feeding me for years. Every few months, they find a new victim. Someone desperate to belong, someone who'll do anything for acceptance. And I grow stronger with each one. But Marcus had one advantage she didn't know about. Hidden in his jacket pocket was a small silver cross, blessed by his grandmother before she died. It had been a gift for his confirmation, and he'd carried it ever since. With his last ounce of strength, Marcus pulled out the cross and pressed it against her hand. The effect was immediate and devastating. Lilith shrieked, a sound like 1,000 voices screaming at once, and released him. The shadows recoiled, and the temperature began to rise. Clever boy. But do you really think that trinket will save you? Marcus was already running, clutching the cross like a lifeline. Behind him, he could hear her laughter echoing through the chapel, followed by the sound of pursuit. The seminary had changed. What had been a straightforward path to the chapel was now a labyrinth of twisted corridors and impossible geometry. Doors led to rooms that couldn't exist, stairs climbed to floors that weren't there moments before. Marcus ran through hallways that stretched on forever, past windows that showed not the outside world but scenes of horror from throughout history. The building itself had become a living thing, reshaping itself to trap him. You cannot escape me. I am in every shadow, every dark corner of your mind. I know your fears, your desires, your deepest secrets. He turned a corner and found himself in a classroom filled with desks arranged in perfect rows. But sitting at each desk was a corpse, teenagers like himself, all staring at him with empty sockets. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. The silver cross began to glow in his hand, and the corpses stopped their advance. They opened their mouths and screamed, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to come from their very souls. Then they crumbled to dust, leaving only empty clothes and the echo of their pain. You're only delaying the inevitable. This building exists outside normal space and time. You could run for 1,000 years and never find the exit. But Marcus had remembered something his grandmother had taught him. Words of power, older than the thing that pursued him. He closed his eyes and began to speak. Our Father, who art in heaven. The prayer came back to him as if his grandmother was whispering the words in his ear. Each syllable made the cross burn brighter, each verse pushed back the darkness that sought to claim him. Hallowed be thy name. The shadows around him began to retreat, and new doors appeared, leading back toward the entrance. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. The building shuddered, as if the very foundations were being shaken by forces beyond comprehension. Stop. You don't understand what you're doing. I am not your enemy. I am offering you power, pleasure, eternal life in the shadows. On earth as it is in heaven. The cross was burning now, not with heat but with pure light that cut through the darkness like a blade. Give us this day our daily bread. Marcus ran toward the nearest door, the prayer giving him strength he didn't know he possessed. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Suddenly he could see the way out, a straight path through the maze of corridors. And lead us not into temptation. The front doors of the seminary appeared ahead of him, salvation made manifest. But deliver us from evil. But Lilith was there, blocking his path. She was no longer beautiful but terrible, her true form revealed. Her skin was pale as bone, her hair wreathed like serpents, and her eyes were black holes that seemed to pull at his soul. You will not leave. I have invested too much in you. You belong to me now. Marcus held up the cross, and she recoiled. I don't belong to anyone. He ran at her, the cross held high. The moment the blessed silver touched her, she screamed and dissolved into shadow. The doors flew open, and Marcus stumbled out into the night. Marcus ran down the hill, not stopping until he reached his car. His hands shook as he started the engine, and he didn't breathe easily until the seminary was lost behind the trees. The next morning, he went to school with dark circles under his eyes and a hollow look that his teachers noticed but didn't comment on. When he saw his friends in the hallway, they watched him with expressions of surprise and something that might have been disappointment. So, Sarah said, cornering him at his locker. How did it go? Marcus studied her face, looking for any sign of the person he'd thought he knew. You tell me. Her mask slipped for just a moment, and he saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. The question is, how long have you been feeding her? How many kids have you sent to that place? Marcus walked away from him, leaving them standing in the hallway. He never spoke of what had happened that night, not to his parents, not to the police, not to anyone. Who would believe him? But sometimes, late at night, he would see movement in the shadows of his room. Sometimes he would hear whispers in the wind, calling his name in a voice like breaking glass. You cannot escape me forever. I am in every shadow, every dark corner of your mind. And someday, when you least expect it, I will come for you. Marcus would touch the cross at his throat and whisper the prayer his grandmother had taught him. The shadows would retreat, and the whispers would fade. But he knew she was right. He had seen too much, learned too much, to ever truly be free. The seminary still stood on the hill, waiting for the next victim. And somewhere in its depths, Lilith waited too, growing stronger with each passing day. Marcus had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Because in the end, there was no choice but to keep fighting. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. And somewhere in the darkness, Lilith smiled and began to plan her next move. 6 months later, Marcus watched from across the cafeteria as Sarah and her friends approached a new student. The pattern was depressingly familiar. The casual friendship, the gradual inclusion, the eventual death. But Marcus was no longer the same frightened boy who'd entered the seminary that October night. Tonight, when the new victim inevitably accepted the dare, Marcus would be waiting. Armed with blessed silver and ancient prayers, he would stand between another innocent soul and the thing that hungered in the shadows. The war was far from over, but for the first time since that terrible night, Marcus felt something that might have been hope. The real battle was just beginning.